So today's webinar is dedicated to the presentation of the Net Zero Industry Act by DG ENER and DG GROW, which was adopted last May 27th. More specifically, if we go to the agenda, Andrea, please. We will start today with an overview of the status quo and overall objectives of the Net Zero Industry Act. And we will then deep dive into the key dimension of the NZIA, including a focus on the Net Zero Europe platform, an overview of the strategic projects and financing, as well as access to market. We will also have a presentation on permitting and net zero acceleration valleys, and an overview of the timeline and next step for the implementation of the NZIA. This session will be followed by a Q&A sessions. This will be structured in 10 minutes poll for DG ENER to collect useful insight on the investment needs, and 10 minutes Q&A for you to ask questions based on the presentation done by DG ENER. So today we have over 140 registered stakeholders. I see now 93 are connected from very different stakeholder groups, both from network operators, storage suppliers, financial institutions, research entities. So we really encourage everybody to engage in the discussion questions and to post questions yourself so that you can share your insights on the topics that are covered in today's webinar. So I will now leave the floor to Ángel Catalina Rubiales, Policy Officer in DG ENER and Team Leader in the Unit A4, which is responsible for the implementation of the Investors Dialogue on Energy. Please, Ángel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Beatrice, and good morning, everyone. And thank you all already for your participation in this seminar. As said by Beatrice, we are in DG ENER responsible for the management of this investor dialogue, to which we attach a lot of importance, because in the context of the undergoing work to mobilize financing to meet the huge investment needs we have for the green transition, for us collecting the views and having the opinion and views of the investors on what are the key problems and the key issues they are facing to mobilize financing and in general to address the existing barriers to mobilize all this funding is crucial. And this is why we have launched this initiative. And today we welcome this seminar on the net zero industry. So we expect a very fruitful discussion and having very relevant insights from this seminar on the work we are undertaking, also in view of the next multi-annual financial framework. As you know, the Commission has started to work on this to see what the ideas and what elements can be introduced in the next European budget. And as you may guess, energy is at the center, or one of the key elements in this discussion, considering the high financing needs existing to achieve the green transition. So I stop here. I will not take more time, and I will now pass the floor to the next speaker for presenting the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ángel, and good morning to everyone. My name is Vincent Beruto, and I'm the head of unit at DG Energy, in charge of competitiveness, digitization, research and innovation. And it's my pleasure to say a few words of introduction to set the scene for this webinar. And I would like to start by recalling that the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine have massively disrupted the world's energy system. And the record energy prices and the disruptions in global supply chains that we have experienced have challenged our energy system as never before. And that has prompted the EU to fast-track the energy transition. And 2 years ago, it was in May 2022, the Commission presented its REPowerEU plan with the aim to phase out the Union's dependency on Russian energy imports. And we had 3 clear priorities in this plan: A, energy savings; B, diversification of energy supplies; and C, an accelerated rollout of renewable energy. And all these has brought major results. For example, the natural gas demand declined by 18% between August 2022 and March this year, or imports of Russian gas have dropped. They represented 45% of overall EU imports in 2021, and they went down to 15% last year. Last year again, wind alone produced more electricity than gas in the EU. And what is more, the EU has agreed on the most ambitious climate and energy package ever, with increased targets for energy efficiency and renewable energies for 2030. So with this, clearly, we have consolidated our leadership position for the fast deployment of net zero technologies. But what is, however, also clear and is a growing concern is that such a leadership is not matched by an equally strong position in the manufacturing of net zero energy technologies. And the consequence is that we risk replacing our dependency on fossil fuels with another dependency on clean technologies and their components. And this is why the Commission has put measures to secure the supply of cost-effective clean energy technologies. This is a matter of European sovereignty. And not only are those measures important to increase energy supply security, but they also bring jobs and growth. I'd like to mention a finding from the International Energy Agency here, which showed that the global market for key mass manufactured net zero technologies is set to triple by 2030, with an annual growth worth 600 billion. So that's the these are massive figures. Today in the EU, we are a net importer of net zero technologies with some very strong dependencies in certain sectors like solar photovoltaics, where our demand is almost exclusively covered by imports from China. And our clean energy manufacturing industry is facing headwinds, even in sectors like wind energy or heat pumps, where the union has a strong manufacturing base. We see our market shares eroding. If you could mute your mic, please, that would help. Thanks. We see other regions in the world as well taking large-scale initiatives to boost their net zero industry, and the result is that the competition worldwide is growing very fast. And this is why the European Union recently adopted the Net Zero Industry Act, also known as the NZIA, with the aim to provide predictability, certainty, but also long-term signals to incentivize investments in net zero technology manufacturing within the EU. And this is precisely that new piece of legislation that we would like to present to you today. My colleagues, both from DG Energy and DG GROW, since it's a shared responsibility, will present those elements of the Act that we think might be the most relevant for you. We believe that the engagement of investors is key for the successful implementation of NZIA, and we are, of course, very eager to present that new piece of legislation to you. And so without further ado, I would like to pass the floor now to Pablo Riesgo Abeledo from my unit. Pablo will give you an overview of the Act before we dive into specific provisions. So Pablo, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Vincent, and good morning to everyone. I mean, Vincent already introduced so this very important act that we put together and we put forward, and that was adopted by the Council last week. The objective of NZIA, Vincent mentioned it, is to build a strong domestic manufacturing capacity for net zero technologies in the EU. And so what I'll give right now is a bit of a very short overview of this act. So on the next slide already, what the Act will do is to secure a sustainable supply of net zero technologies in the EU with this objective of increasing manufacturing capacity. And on the next slides, you will see two political benchmarks that are put forward in the Act. The aim of these benchmarks is to ensure a reduction of strategic dependencies by enhancing manufacturing capacity to achieve, on one hand, 40% of the EU annual deployment needs for net zero technologies to achieve our 2030 climate and energy objectives. And the second benchmark relates to, in view of achieving 15% of world production by 2040 of these net zero technologies. To achieve these benchmarks, the Acts put forward a series of support actions to the sector that my colleagues will present. But before moving into that, I would like to clarify a bit the scope of the Net Zero Industry Act, and that's on the next slide. First of all, and it's very important, the Net Zero Industry Act focuses on manufacturing of net zero technologies, and it adopts a whole supply chain approach, meaning that it's not only the end product that is covered, but also all the prior components that are used in this end product. The Act covers 19 net zero technologies. It's one single list of net zero technologies, and it's a very broad coverage going from the usual solar technologies, wind technologies, but also some other technologies such as energy system related energy efficiency technologies. As I mentioned before, the Act not only covers the end product, but also all the components in the supply chain. To do so, the Act refers to components that are primarily used for the production of net zero technologies. These are the components that would fall under the scope of the Act and for which the provisions in the Act would apply. There are two paths to be identified as a component primarily used. Either a component can be listed in the Annex of Components that will be published and adopted in March 2025. Either the member state can select those components on an ad hoc basis and per facility. Two additional projects that are also in scope of this Act are energy-intensive industry decarbonization projects and carbon capture storage sites. On the next slide, already as a bit of an overview, here the different chapters of the Act. We covered more or less now just one, the chapter number 1 about the scope, and then colleagues will now diving into these chapters to explain a bit more the Act. So already on chapter 7 about governance, I give the floor to Elisa to present the Net Zero Europe platform.
Elizabeth, you're muted.
Thanks, Pablo. And yes, you might see this will now be a bit like a speed dating. You will meet several colleagues of the Commission working on the different topics. And I would like to quickly deep dive on the Net Zero Europe platform. This is, as Pablo mentioned, the governance body of NZIA. And the objective is to support the harmonized implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act by coordinating the different activities in member states, but also within other stakeholders, and also sharing best practices on measures that had been already implemented. And the key players within this platform are the member states. So they must nominate their representatives. And the Commission also has a very important role because we are chairing the platform. And we'll continuously work together with all the member state representatives as well as with these subgroups. So they're special or particular groups on certain topics like skills academies and the Net Zero Industry Group, and there might also be other groups, for example, on the net zero acceleration areas. So next slide. I see the slide really small, so I'm not sure whether we could pin it a bit bigger or whether it's just on my screen. Anyway, so let's go to the tasks of the platform. And there's really a variety of tasks and topics the platform will cover. And as this is the investors dialogue, we thought it makes sense to focus on those tasks related to financing. And yeah, there it's also again an advisory coordination role. So for example, the platform will advise on how national, so member state and EU funding can be best coordinated. It will also reveal or produce recommendations how to ensure sufficient funding for NZIA objectives. So there on this, there will be a first report in October, and regular reports will follow. And a fourth point is the exchange with stakeholders. So for example, within the Net Zero Industry Group, I already mentioned, but yeah, there are also other stakeholders like the industrial alliances, associations, NGOs. And yeah, last but not least, the Net Zero platform will examine the bottlenecks and financial needs that net zero strategic projects might face. And yeah, this is the keyword to hand over to my colleague Salvatore.
Yes, good morning, and thanks a lot, Elizabeth. Yes, we can jump in, let's say, one of the core aspects of the Act, which is basically the definition and the inclusion of strategic projects. This is an important concept, especially for, I would say, for investors and also for the project promoters, since the identification of strategic projects has important implications in terms of predictability and also signaling efforts also for investors. The criteria, benefits, and the process for a project to be recognized as strategic is described in the relevant articles in the regulation. What I would like to point out in this slide is basically the benefits for a project, to be considered as strategic. So first of all, I would say that one of the most important aspects is that member states should give those projects the status of the highest national significance possible, if of course this is allowed and this is permitted under the existing national law. And so those projects should be treated as such also for the permitting process. The second important aspect is also the fact that the NZIA Act also provide for clear as well as shorter time limits for the permitting procedures. And in particular, for strategic projects, for the construction or expansion of net zero strategic project, with the yearly manufacturing capacities lower than 1 gigawatt yearly per year, the duration of the permitting process should not be longer than 9 months. Instead, if the annual capacity is beyond 1 gigawatt, then this threshold is fixed at 12 months. For the other manufacturing projects, strategic projects that are not measurable in gigawatts, instead, the timeline is fixed to 12 months maximum. The third point that is also relevant to mention is that all the disputes that concern strategic projects should also be treated as urgent by member states and also as allowed by the national legislation. And then first aspect is that those projects should be considered as in the public interest and may also have an overriding public interest. And this is extremely important also with the respect, to the application of environmental legislation. In the next slide, instead, I would like to briefly mention also the selection criteria that are described under Article 13. And it is important that strategic projects at least comply with one of the three mentioned criteria. The first one is the contribution to resilience through added manufacturing capacities. Here, the understanding is that investment should fulfill criterion like adding manufacturing capacities for net zero technologies in order, for tackling EU dependencies of those, technologies, as well as for projects that provide a substantive contribution to achieve the 2030 climate objectives, or increase manufacturing capacities in technology areas where the EU represents as a significant share. And so basically this would improve the resilience. As a second criterion is the positive supply chain effects. By providing access to the EU to the best available technologies in net zero technologies, as well as to first of a kind manufacturing capacities, and at the same time also complied also with other two important aspects. So first of all, to put in place measures that would contribute to attract, retain, as well as upskill and reskill workforces. The second aspect instead that should also contribute to the competitiveness of SMEs. Last point in terms of criterion is instead contribution to the Union climate and energy objectives to improve the manufacturing practices. Here we intend for manufacturing practices those that aim at improving environmental sustainability, as well as performance, circularity aspects, as well as resource efficiency. The regulation also foresees, let's say, simplified recognition for the strategic project status for projects that are located in less developed areas, less developed and transition regions, as well as in just transition funds territories, and that are also eligible for cohesion policy instrument funding. So basically that upon the granting of support by those instruments, the project promoter can ask member states, for recognition as a strategic project. Something similar will also apply for projects funded under the Innovation Fund or within an IPCI, so basically important projects of common European interest initiative. Concerning the application process, very briefly, well, just to finish with the criteria, I want to mention that the Commission will also provide, will publish guidelines for basically for the implementation of those criteria in order to provide more clarity for how they will be used in the evaluation in the assessment process. Concerning the application process, this will be managed by member states and it will be launched in the coming weeks. The Commission will provide a preset form that can be used by the applicants, that will be used by the applicants to submit their own request for their projects to be recognized as a strategic. And this form will require the promoters to provide evidence on how the projects fulfill the above mentioned criteria, as well as include a business plan that will concern also aspects concerning the financial viability, as well as the objective of creating quality jobs, and also a draft timeline on how the projects, on when the projects will contribute to the Union manufacturing capacity. The member states will have 1 month to assess those applications, and in case of rejections, promoters will be also have the chance to resubmit the application to the Commission. In the next slide, instead, I would like just to briefly mention some of the instruments that have been put in place by the EU in the last period. As you know, Net Zero Industry Act doesn't have its own budgets, for the support of manufacturing capacities. Despite that, the EU has been pretty active in the last years also to provide instruments that can, with the aim of triggering private investment, as mentioned and as said by Angel and also by Vincent. it is crucial that the resources, the scarce resources that the EU can put in place, based the huge challenges that we have in front of us, will be used as efficiently as possible in order to trigger as much as possible private investments. Just to provide you some quick information on the available instruments. Of course, one of the most important instruments is for sure the Innovation Fund. As you might know, the Innovation Fund in the last years has a specific strand that supports net zero technologies, in particular the manufacturing. The last call that was supporting the constructions and operation of manufacturing facilities for renewable energy installations, as well as electrolyzers, fuel cells, energy storage solutions, and heat pumps, at a budget of 1.4 billion euros. So we expect that this support to continue also in the coming years. Then in InvestEU, which is the flagship instrument that we have as EU managed program to support investment in EU. It doesn't provide non-repayable instruments, but it provides support in the forms of loans, equity, quasi-equity, and so on and so forth. We recently, as a Commission, managed also to include net zero priorities in the guarantee agreement with the implementing partners of InvestEU. The main implementing partners in the European Investment Bank that been pretty active recently in the field of net zero industry. Just to mention the wind package with the counter guarantees to support wind manufacturers, but at the same time also a number of operations that saw the involvement of the European Investment Bank support. Just to mention, in the energy storage field, in the battery field, the support provided to Vercor and to Nordvolt, in the field of solar PV, to Trisan in Italy. And then just to conclude on InvestEU, it is interesting also to mention the instrument of the venture debt, which is offered by the EIB. Is one of the few organizations in Europe that provide this instrument, which has ideal features that stands between debt and equity, and so far it also through the green transition thematic can be used in a number of operations. Just to mention a few, Exeger, a Swedish company which is active in the production of dye-sensitized solar cells, as well as pure battery technologies in Germany for the production of precursor cathode active material, and so on and so forth. But of course, InvestEU is not only EIB. There are also other implementing partners that are involved. Just to mention an example, as a national promotional bank, InvestNL in the Netherlands that recently invested in IET Solar, which is a company active in the silicon-based solar modules manufacturing. As regards research and innovation, I want just to mention Horizon Europe, that through the innovation actions can provide support to technology readiness level up to level 8, which basically means a system demonstration in operational environments, basically to provide the demonstration, the support to demonstration plants. The same can also be done also through a number of partnerships that have been established to support also NZIA objectives, like Battery for EU, Clean Hydrogen, Clean Energy Transition, and the upcoming partnership on solar. Just to conclude on Horizon Europe is also the importance of the European Innovation Council, and in particular the accelerator that can provide support up to TRL 9 through blended finance, basically grants plus equity. As regard the member states part, just to conclude on this part, the preamble of NZIA Industry Act also encouraged member states to spend 25% of ETS revenues in line with NZIA objectives. This is an important point because then they can also would help to channel some of those resources for manufacturing capacities. So far, member states have been used the recovery and resilience plans. We have some examples of use of the recovery funds also to support manufacturing capacities. An example we have it on for Trisan, that was supported also under RRF and was also supported, by the way, under the Innovation Fund. So this is an example of projects that benefited from different sources of funding. The RDF, the European Regional Development Fund, is also an interesting instrument, to consider, especially in the light of the Strategic Technology Road Platform. As you might know, STEP regulation is an initiative that aims at providing support to manufacturing of critical technologies in Europe, as well as, let's say, tackling strategic dependencies. One of the area of support of STEP is clean technologies, and NZIA projects are specifically mentioned in the STEP regulation, which basically mean that those projects can benefit from the possibility offered for cohesion policy instruments, and in particular ERDF and the Just Transition Fund, to apply up to 100% intensity aid for manufacturing projects that falls under the scope of NZIA, as well as to provide support to large companies. Within this reconnaissance, I would like also to mention the temporary crisis and transition framework. It's basically state aids, and this framework allows member states to provide support to specific technologies that are also in strong risk of diverted away from Europe, and this in particular concern batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, electrolyzers, as well as equipment for carbon capture, usage, and storage. The guidelines provide all the possible information concerning the state aids and intensities, and also the maximum amount that can be given under the scheme, as well as all the criteria for the matching funds. So far, the TCTF has been used by 9 countries in Europe, and the matching aid option has been used by Germany to support Norway. Last but not least, what I'd like to mention is the part on IPCI, so important project of common European interest that you might have heard. Those are basically large and ambitious projects that are undertaken by multiple member states aimed at tackling and overcoming important market or systemic failures. Those projects need to have a strong R&I component, but can also include also first industrial deployment. So very important for the part on NZIA. They see, of course, an important role for member states that should identify the market failure, and but also strong involvement for the Commission, in particular for DG Comp, for the authorization of those operations. And last but not least, maybe something which is less known, which is the mini IPCI, as they are called, and that are part of the global block exemption regulation. Here, the support is essentially provided to industrial research. There's no need for notification, differently from the TCTF, so it's way quicker for the implementation. The aid intensity can be up to 80%. And the maximum aid, of course, changing, ranging from experimental development, where the aid should be lower, with respect to fundamental research, where the aid can reach up to 110 million. And this type of instrument is also open for SME and non-SMEs actors. To conclude, then, there will be interesting then, to know if all these instruments, I mean, your knowledge and also your, let's say, relation with those ones, and if you also think that there would be any need, for additional or new instruments for the support of manufacturing capacities. And then I would then hand over to Alessandro for the aspects, concerning the demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Salvatore. Good morning, everybody. Alessandro Polito from DG Energy, and I follow the access to market chapter of NZIA, more specifically the article on auctions. So NZIA has a chapter on access to market, and the purpose was exactly to facilitate the access to market of technologies, of clean technologies that have very high sustainability and resilience characteristics. So the idea is to create lead markets that facilitate the access to the European market of products that are not simply or only the cheapest products, but also the products that have higher quality. It includes mostly three types of provisions, one related to public procurement, one related to auctions for the deployment of renewable energy, and another one focusing on other support schemes for the installation of renewable energy technologies and other clean technologies. Starting with the rules on public procurement, the new rules basically provide a new way, change the way in which authorities procure goods, works, and services related to the net zero technologies under the scope of NZIA. And the article provides that the authorities have to take into account environmental sustainability contribution of these products, so their environmental characteristics, and their contribution to resilience, so how resilient these products are. Regarding resilience in particular, there is a trigger, meaning that this criterion and the rules of resilience that are detailed in the article apply only when there is a dependency from a third country of more than 50% of the supply within the EU of that specific technology or its components. So basically, the rules are very well detailed, what public authorities can procure and what they cannot, and the content, the content coming from third countries that the product can have. And this is linked to a specific situation of dependency. The article also provides that where the application of the resilience and sustainability contribution provided in NZIA result in disproportionate cost, or if there are no suitable tenders that are submitted, authorities may not apply this criteria. So there is an opt-out clause in case offers received result in disproportionate cost. Next slide, please. The second article, as I mentioned, refers to auctions. So it provides that when member states design auctions for the deployment of renewable energy technology, they have to apply non-price criteria. There are two categories in a way. First, there are three pre-qualification criteria that are related to cybersecurity, responsible business conduct, and ability to deliver projects fully and on time. And then a second category in which member states have a flexibility on whether to apply them as pre-qualification or award criteria, and they are related to sustainability and resilience. Sustainability is then further defined and refers more in particular to environmental sustainability, innovation, and energy system integration. Member states have to apply this criteria to at least 30% of the volume auction per year, so 30% of the total volume of auctions, or alternatively at least 6 gigawatts per member states. And when they apply this criteria as a work criteria, they have to give them a minimum weight of 15% and a maximum weight of 30%. They can go even beyond 30% whenever an auction doesn't fall under the stated rules. There are some flexibilities in which these rules can be applied, in the sense that also here there is a sort of opt-out clause whenever a member state expects a cost difference in the support scheme that it provides under the auction above 15%, but this has to be demonstrated through verifiable and objective data. And then also flexibility for those member states, especially the small ones, that do auctions in which there is a maximum project size of 10 megawatts. So if an auction provides that the maximum size of the project is 10 megawatts, then member states are not obliged to apply these rules. On the criteria that I mentioned before, these are just, let's say, these are not really specified in NZIA, and so NZIA provides that the Commission will have to adopt an implementing act by 9 months after the entry into force of NZIA, so indicatively around end of March. And this implementing act has to further specify the criteria. So further details on the content of the criteria will be included in the implementing act, and the text of NZIA doesn't really say much on this. And then next slide, please. The last measure concerns other support schemes and provides that when member states set up these schemes or update existing schemes that are addressed to household companies or consumers, and the schemes that incentivize the purchase of net zero technology final products, member states have to promote the purchase by beneficiaries of these technologies of products that have high sustainability and resilience contribution. How do they do this? in two ways, either by providing additional proportionate financial compensation to products with high sustainability and resilience contribution, or by even potentially conditioning the eligibility to the scheme on the basis of this criteria. So they can even give more money to those products that have high sustainability and resilience contribution, or they can even decide, member states can even decide that certain support schemes will be addressed only with products complying with certain characteristics in terms of sustainability and resilience. That's all for me. I can hand back the floor to the next speaker.
Hi, good morning. My name is Daniel Gerber from the European Commission. I work in DG GROW, and I will be talking about the permitting chapter and the net zero acceleration valleys. There are two slides. First slide, please. Okay, so permitting, the chapter that my colleague Alessandro just presented on access to markets is very important for creating investor confidence, as it's about creating demand, ensuring demand. Permitting is as important because it's where we create investment and planning certainty at beforehand, when at project conception stage, covering the entire lead time up to construction and operationalization of a production facility. As many of us know, permitting is very complex, particularly in Europe. Industrial projects have to acquire many permits and respect with many European national and local rules. And this is the first time that at EU level, at European level, we have harmonized rules for industrial permitting. What is very important to know is that the Net Zero Industry Act is a regulation, not a directive. This means that at the end of this month, when it enters into force, it will apply automatically across not one, not two, but all EU member states for all projects that are in the scope of the Net Zero Industry Act. That also means that these provisions on permitting, these obligations on authorities, have to be automatically respected. They don't have to be translated into national law, and they can be found online in the regulation when it's published. This, in our view, creates a powerful tool to increase investment and planning certainty. Why? Because now we will have a harmonized regime where there is much more clarity on the amount of time needed until a project becomes operational. One of the key aspects in the Act is the need for member states to create a single point of contact. This will have to be fully operational within 6 months by January. And the single point of contact coordinates the entire permit granting process for a whole project. In the past, a project had to be in touch with dozens, if not more, different authorities. Nowadays, this will change, and there will be one contact point. The single point of contact is not only responsible for coordinating the permitting, the single point of contact is also there as a hub for investors and project promoters, because the single point of contact will promote information also on dispute settlement, on financing and investment services, on funding possibilities, on business support services, including but not limited to corporate tax declaration, local tax laws, or labor law. So this single point of contact is also very important for our audience today, because it will have the answers ready that you seek, answers that you need to be convinced to invest in that region, in that project. Next slide, please. A powerful tool in this regulation are the legally binding time limits. As my colleague Salvatore Amico explained, for strategic projects, there is an even stronger provision, which means that the entire permit granting process has to be carried out between 9 and 12 months, depending on the size of a project. Nowadays, it can take 2-3 years, as many of you know, and this will change very soon. Of course, there are some exemptions, and sometimes environmental assessments can take longer, but there are also provisions in the Act to streamline also these environmental impact assessments. Next slide, please. The net zero acceleration valleys are a new concept that are in the Net Zero Industry Act. They are a concept whereby member states, EU countries, can create, they can designate a specific geographic area and give it an EU label to become such a valley. The idea is that this valley concept further fosters net zero industrial activity and specifically attracts further projects and investments. We already have a lot of interest from different regions and existing industrial clusters in this idea, and we are currently further developing the concept. Next slide, please. There are 3 obligations that can be taken as a guiding principle on the valley. These are so if an EU country decides to create such a valley, such a cluster, there are 3 obligations. The first one is that the member state, that means the central government, possibly in cooperation with regional authorities, has to present a concrete plan of how to attract investments into this valley. And it has to, in this plan, it has to describe the available benefits, the available transport, digital energy infrastructure, and it should also propose measures on how to reduce operational expenditure for industry, for instance, via contracts for difference, for energy prices, or for instance, by incentivizing the innovation, by creating innovation hubs, or linking it also to possible skills academies, another concept that is part of this act. So this means that it becomes a collaborative project of national importance, such a valley. The second obligation is that it needs its own single point of contact that I just explained before. This means that a valley, industrial cluster that wants to attract projects and investments will have its own dedicated single point of contact. This is a bit like a business card to the world, because as we know, large projects look for, they want to establish themselves. When they do, they look at 4 or 5 different locations, maybe 2 are in Europe, and hence a valley, a single point of contact, are there to provide all the answers to convince projects and investors to settle in that region. The final obligation of the valleys is that authorities have to create an environmental assessment ex ante of the concerned area to further simplify project-specific permitting in the future. I believe this was my last point. I think yes. Then I just summarize with one sentence. The permitting and the net zero acceleration valleys are specifically tailored to attracting investments into the EU of net zero technology manufacturing projects. These are a game changer, just like the other chapters in the Act. And if anyone has any questions, please be in touch. And I pass over to, I believe, to my colleague, Claudia Merkusova.
Yes, thank you very much, Danielle, and good morning to everyone from my side as well. My name is Claudia Merkusova, and I work in DG Energy, so in the team of Vincent Beruto. And I have the pleasure to finish this presentation by summarizing basically what's coming on our site, what are the next steps, and what you will be seeing published on behalf of the Commission related to the Net Zero Industry Act. Our implementation work started already after we finalized the negotiations, because of course there is a lot still to be done. The first one, as already mentioned by Salvatore, will be a guidance on the strategic projects and on the criteria, because as Daniel just clearly explained, NZIA is a regulation, which means that some provisions enter into force with the entry into force of the regulation, and this will be the case for the strategic projects. So this will be the very first document that you will see. But then in parallel, we are also now already working on a delegated and an implementing act on the components that will be under the scope of the Net Zero Industry Act. The final text that will hopefully be issued at the end of June contains an annex that states, that lists 19 categories and then subcategories of technologies, but right now doesn't detail the components. So for instance, you will find there a category of solar and then subcategories of, for example, PV technologies or solar thermal technologies. But then these delegated and implementing acts will then be issued to specify what components are really considered primarily used and thus will be under the scope. And then there will be another implementing act on the selection criteria for strategic projects. This will build up on the guidance that will be issued very, very soon. And last but not least, two other implementing acts, one on criteria in public procurement, so this environmental sustainability, and then one other one on auctions, so the pre-qualification and award criteria for auctions, as it was explained by Alessandro, and that within 9 months. There are two more pieces of secondary legislation that we don't mention on this slide. One is on the innovation aspect of the Net Zero Industry Act, so regulatory sandboxes, and one on monitoring, but those will come a bit later in time. So we decided not to speak about them today that much. One mention that I would just like to make is that when it comes to monitoring, the Commission is already really extensively working on mapping the supply chains and getting the intelligence on the market of the manufacturing landscape. Next slide, please. Yes, and so here as our final slide, we just wanted to show you how our timeline looks like, at least for the next upcoming months. We kicked off our work on the 23rd of May with our first high-level meeting of the Net Zero platform that Elisa introduced at the beginning of our presentation. We had over 90 participants, and as I said, or as it is stated also in the regulation, it's a high-level platform. So we managed to gather ministers, state secretaries, and Sherpas to discuss especially strategic projects and financing aspects. Then in June, the regulation will enter into force, and then the most imminent point will be then permitting provisions and the SPOC, so the single point of contact that Daniel just explained. In January as well, there will be the implementing act on auctions, and support schemes will take effect. And then in April, the public procurement rules that will take effect for all contracts. And with this, I think we can close. We even have 4 minutes in advance, and I will give the floor back to Beatrice and the team, and we can open the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you to all the DG ENER speakers. It was a very insightful presentation. So we will have now a 25 minutes Q&A session.